Most people think camping is peaceful, quiet, safe. But the truth is, at night, the quiet can feel like something is paying attention. Tonight's stories all happened after dark, at campgrounds where nothing was supposed to happen. If you're watching this late at night, comment where you're watching from and what time it is. Let's begin. We picked that campground because it was supposed to be quiet, late fall, after peak season, the kind of place people only stopped at if they really wanted to be alone. It was just me and my friend Mark. No big plan, no long hike, just one night away from the city, a cooler, a small tent, a campfire that wouldn't need to last long. When we pulled in, the place looked almost abandoned. A wooden sign near the entrance listed about 20 sites. Only 3 were marked occupied. All of them were far apart, too far to accidentally wander into each other's space. We chose a spot near the edge of the campground. Trees on 3 sides, a narrow dirt path behind us, no neighboring tents in sight. It felt private, safe. The kind of quiet that makes you breathe a little deeper. We set up before sunset, drove the stakes in, unfolded the camp chairs, put the cooler near the picnic table. Everything felt routine, normal. Mark joked about how dead the place was. I remember him saying, "If someone screams out here, nobody's coming." We laughed. That should have been the moment we packed back up. But it wasn't. As the sky darkened, the temperature dropped fast. We lit the fire, watched the flames catch. The light pushed the darkness back just enough to feel comfortable. No music, no generator hum, just the crackle of wood, wine brushing through the trees, the occasional snap of a branch far away. Around 10 p.m., we noticed something else, how quiet it really was. No voices, no footsteps, no cars passing. Even the wind seemed to calm down. By 11, we were tired. We doused the fire until it was just glowing embers, locked our food in the bear box, double-checked the cooler latch, habit more than fear. The tent felt smaller once we zipped it shut. Fabric walls, thin floor, our backpacks pressed against the sides. Mark fell asleep almost immediately. I could hear his breathing slow, even, heavy. I stayed awake longer, staring up at the faint outline of the trees through the mesh panel, letting my thoughts wander. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was just the wind shifting again. A soft crunch, barely there, then another, slow, measured, footsteps, not rushing, not stumbling, just walking. I held my breath and listened. The sound came from somewhere near the dirt path behind our site. Each step distinct, crunch, pause, crunch, too even to be an animal, too controlled. I waited for Mark to stir. He didn't. The footsteps stopped. I told myself whoever it was would move on. A late arrival, a ranger, someone heading to the bathroom. But then the sound started again. Closer this time. Not toward the fire pit, not toward the road, toward our tent. I turned my head slightly, careful not to make noise. The fabric wall barely shifted. Crunch, pause, crunch. The steps circled one side of the tent, slow enough that I could follow them in my head. I didn't reach for my flashlight, didn't unzip anything, didn't call out. Every instinct told me to stay still. The footsteps stopped right near the head of the tent, so close I could hear the faint press of weight against the ground. Whoever it was didn't speak, didn't cough, didn't move closer. They just stood there, listening. I remember thinking how thin the tent wall felt, how easy it would be to press a hand against it and leave an imprint. Mark shifted beside me, mumbled something in his sleep. The footsteps didn't react. They stayed exactly where they were. That was when I realized something that made my stomach tighten. Whoever was outside wasn't trying to get our attention. They weren't lost. They weren't confused. They knew exactly where we were, and they were in no hurry to leave. I don't know how long they stood there. Seconds felt stretched. Minutes lost their shape. I kept my eyes open, staring at the dark curve of the tent wall, waiting for something to happen. A voice, a zipper, a step away. Nothing. My heart was pounding hard enough that I worried they could hear it through the fabric. I tried to slow my breathing, in through my nose, out through my mouth. Quiet, controlled. The footsteps started again. This time, they didn't move away. Crunch, pause, crunch, slow, deliberate. They were circling the tent. I followed the sound as it moved along the side, each step placed carefully, like whoever it was didn't want to trip or make noise. The ground near our site was covered in dry leaves and dirt. There was no way to walk there silently, and yet the steps were measured, intentional. I glanced toward Mark. He was still asleep, turned slightly toward the tent wall. His breathing hadn't changed. Crunch, pause, crunch. The sound reached the back of the tent, then the other side. Completing a full circle, they stopped again, right near the zipper. I felt my fingers curl into the sleeping bag. I told myself not to move, not to react. If they thought we were asleep, maybe they would leave. A few seconds passed, then more. I could hear the faintest sound of fabric shifting, not the zipper, just the tent wall brushing against something outside, like a hand or a shoulder. I swallowed hard. Every warning I'd ever heard about camping alone or staying at empty campgrounds ran through my head. Stories about people wandering into the wrong site, stories about strangers watching from the dark. I told myself that if they tried to open the tent, I would yell. I would wake Mark. I would turn on the flashlight, but the zipper never moved. Instead, the footsteps started again, closer together now, shorter steps. They circled the tent a second time. This time, they stopped at the head of the tent. Right where my face was, I could feel it. That pressure you get when someone is standing too close, even if you can't see them. I stared at the thin layer of fabric between us. The mesh panel above it showed nothing but black. I waited for a shadow, for a shape. Nothing. No flashlight beam, no phone glow, no sound of breathing. Just the presence. Minutes passed, or maybe only seconds. My body was tense, ready to react, but my mind felt slow, foggy, like it was trying to protect itself by not thinking too much. Finally, the footsteps moved again. Crunch, pause, crunch. They walked away from the tent, toward the dirt path. I didn't relax. I didn't sit up. I waited. I listened as the steps faded slightly, then stopped. Too close. They hadn't left the site. They were just standing somewhere out of sight. I lay there, counting my breaths, waiting for the sound to return, waiting for the zipper to move, waiting for something worse. Nothing happened. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under, not sleep, not really, more like drifting, shallow and uneasy. When I finally opened my eyes again, The sky above the tent was just beginning to lighten. Morning. I turned my head slowly and listened. The campground was silent. No footsteps, no movement, just birds, distant and cautious. For a moment, I wondered if I had imagined everything, if fear and darkness had played tricks on me. Then I noticed something that erased that thought completely. There were footprints in the dirt outside our tent, not animal tracks, not scattered, clear, human. They formed a rough circle around the tent, close enough that whoever made them could have reached out and touched the fabric. And near the zipper, the prints stopped. They didn't lead away, they just ended. Mark woke up to the sound of me unzipping the tent. "What are you doing?" he whispered. I froze with the zipper halfway down. My hands were shaking. There were footprints. I said quietly, "All around the tent." That got his attention. We didn't rush outside. We sat there for a few seconds, listening. Nothing moved. No footsteps. No voices. Just mourning. I finally finished unzipping the tent and stepped out first. Cold air hit my face. The fire pit was a ring of ash. The campground looked exactly the same as it had the night before. Empty. Mark followed me out. We stood there in silence, both of us looking down. The footprints were unmistakable. Boot prints, adult size, pressed deep enough into the dirt to be clear. They circled the tent once. Then again, some of them overlapped, like whoever made them had slowed down near the zipper. Mark crouched and studied them. "These aren't old," he said. "They're from last night." I nodded. "What about animals?" he asked, though he already sounded unconvinced. "No." I said, "They stopped right here." I pointed to the spot near the zipper. The prints ended there. No trail leading back to the path. No marks heading toward another campsite. Just gone. We checked the rest of the site. The picnic table, the bear box, the fire pit. Nothing was disturbed. Nothing was missing. Whoever had walked around our tent hadn't taken anything, hadn't touched the food, hadn't tried to open the tent. They'd just been there, watching. Mark suggested we ask the ranger. I wasn't sure there even was one on duty, but it felt better than doing nothing. We packed quickly, not in a panic, just efficiently. The kind of packing you do when you don't want to stay any longer than necessary. As we drove toward the campground office, we passed only one other occupied site, a small RV parked under tall trees. No one outside, no movement. The office was open. An older man sat behind the desk, sipping coffee. We told him what happened, not dramatically, just the facts. Footsteps, footprints, no trail leading away. He listened without interrupting, didn't look surprised, didn't laugh. When we finished, he nodded slowly. "People wander through here sometimes," he said, "mostly at night." "Who?" Mark asked. The ranger shrugged. "Locals, drifters, folks who shouldn't be camping out here." I asked him if anyone had reported something similar. He paused for a moment, then said, "You're not the first. That was all. No report, no questions, no advice besides. You did the right thing leaving. We didn't argue. We didn't ask more." As we pulled out of the campground, I looked back one last time. The trees stood still. The dirt path behind our site was empty. Nothing looked wrong, and that was the worst part, because someone had been there, close enough to touch the tent, close enough to hear us breathe. And whoever it was had left without a sound, no goodbye, No explanation, just footprints that didn't lead anywhere. We didn't talk much on the drive home. Mark kept both hands on the wheel, eyes forward. I watched the trees blur past the window, replaying the night over and over, looking for something we missed. Neither of us tried to rationalize it, not out loud. It wasn't until later that afternoon, after we'd unloaded the car, that Mark finally said what we were both thinking. They weren't trying to rob us, he said. If they were, they could have. I nodded. They weren't drunk. I added. And they weren't lost. The way the footsteps moved. The way they stopped. The way they circled the tent more than once. It felt deliberate. That night, I barely slept. Every small sound outside my apartment window made my chest tighten. Footsteps on the sidewalk, a car door closing. I kept picturing the tent wall, how close that person had been, how little separated us. Over the next few days, I started noticing things I hadn't before. How easily someone could walk through a campground at night without being seen. How few people would question it. How normal it would look. I searched online, camping forums, local message boards. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, just something that matched what we experienced. It didn't take long. Post after post described similar nights, footsteps, shadows near tents, people standing just outside the firelight. Most of them ended the same way. Nothing stolen, nothing mumu, just the feeling of being watched. Some commenters said it was harmless, curiosity, people checking sites to see if anyone was inside. Others weren't so sure. One comment stuck with me. They're not there to take your stuff. They're there to see if you notice them. I closed the laptop after that. Mark suggested we go camping again a few weeks later, somewhere busier, more people around. I told him I wasn't ready. Every time I imagined sleeping in a tent again, my body reacted before my mind could catch up. Tight chest, shallow breathing. It wasn't fear of the dark. It was fear of someone choosing to stay hidden. Months passed. Life moved on. The story became something we only brought up occasionally, usually late at night, but there was one detail that kept bothering me. The footprints. They circled the tent, they stopped near the zipper, and then they ended. No trail back to the path, no marks leading away. Whoever it was hadn't walked off. They had simply disappeared. And that meant one thing. At some point, while we were awake, while we were listening, they had stood perfectly still, right outside our tent. I tried to forget about it. For a while, it almost worked. Weeks turned into months. The details dulled around the edges. The story became something that felt distant, like it belonged to a different version of me. But every now and then, something would pull it back. A late-night walk past a park, the sound of footsteps slowing down behind me, someone stopping just a little too close. My body always reacted first. I stopped camping entirely, not just with Mark, with anyone. When people asked why, I gave simple answers. Too busy. Not really my thing anymore. I prefer hotels. The truth felt harder to explain. It wasn't the darkness that bothered me. It wasn't the isolation. It was the idea that someone could be close enough to hear you breathe, and choose not to be seen. One night, months later, I woke up to a familiar sound. Footsteps, soft, measured, coming from the hallway outside my apartment. I sat up in bed, heart racing, listening. The steps stopped right outside my door. I held my breath. Then I heard the building elevator open. Voices, laughter. The footsteps moved away. I didn't sleep after that. The next day, I checked the security cameras in the building lobby. Nothing unusual. People coming and going. No one lingering. Logically, I knew it wasn't the same thing. Different place. Different situation. But my mind didn't care. Because the fear wasn't about who it was. It was about how they moved. How deliberate it felt. How patient. Mark and I talked less after that. Not because we were upset with each other. We just didn't bring it up. Some stories are easier to leave untouched. Then, almost a year later, I saw something online that made my stomach drop. A short post on a local forum. No pictures, no names, just a few lines. Empty campground. Footsteps around our tent. No one there in the morning. The post was dated 3 weeks earlier. Same campground, same section, same time of year. The replies were mixed. Some people joked, some warned them to stay in populated areas. One reply stood out. Did the footprints stop near the zipper? There was no answer. I closed the page and didn't open it again. Some things don't need confirmation. Because deep down, I already knew whatever was outside our tent that night didn't belong to just one place. It belonged to the quiet. I never went back to that campground. Not to check, not out of curiosity, not even during the day. I avoided the entire area, took different routes when I drove nearby, chose places with people, with noise, with lights that stayed on all night. Mark went back once. He didn't tell me until after. It was summer, more crowded, families, kids, campfires everywhere. Nothing happened. No footsteps, no shadows, no strange silences. That place feels normal now, he said, like nothing ever happened. I didn't know how to explain why that made things worse, because whatever stood outside our tent that night didn't feel tied to the campground. It felt tied to the moment, to the quiet, to the fact that we were vulnerable and alone. I still think about the way it moved. Not fast, not aggressive, patient, like it had all the time in the world. Sometimes, late at night, I imagine what would have happened if I had turned on my flashlight, if I had called out, if I had unzipped the tent. I don't think it would have run away. I think it would have stayed exactly where it was, waiting. I've told this story a few times over the years. Usually when the topic of camping comes up, people listen, they nod, they suggest explanations, animals, pranks, drunk locals. I let them. Because the truth is harder to accept. That some people don't want your stuff. They don't want to hurt you. They just want to know how close they can get. And whether you'll notice. I noticed, and I don't camp anymore. I decided to go camping alone because I needed quiet. Not the peaceful kind people post online, the empty kind. The kind where no one expects anything from you. It was a small campground about an hour from town. Nothing scenic, no lake views, no hiking trails worth mentioning. Just a loop road, a few sites, and a tree line that swallowed light after sunset. I arrived late, later than I should have. Only 2 other sites were occupied, both far enough away that I couldn't see their fires. I could tell someone was there, though. Faint smoke, a distant clink of metal. I picked a site near the edge. Old habit. I liked knowing what was behind me. I set up fast. Tent, chair, cooler, no decorations, no lanterns hanging from trees. By the time I lit the fire, the sky was already dark. Not dusk, night. The fire became everything. Light, warmth, orientation. Beyond it, there was nothing, just a wall of trees. I cooked something simple and ate straight from the pan. The sounds of the forest slowly filled in. Crickets, wind, leaves shifting. It felt normal, comforting. That's why it took me a while to notice the shape. At first, I thought it was a tree, just a darker patch of dark. It stood at the edge of the firelight, right where the light stopped reaching. I stared without moving, letting my eyes adjust. The shape didn't change, didn't sway, didn't shift like branches do. It was too straight, too still. I leaned forward slightly, trying to see more. The fire popped, sending sparks up. For just a second, the light flared, and I saw enough to know it wasn't a tree. It was a person, standing just outside the firelight, facing me. I didn't speak, didn't stand, didn't reach for anything. I stayed exactly where I was. The figure didn't move closer, didn't step back. They just stood there, perfectly placed at the edge of the light, watching. I waited for them to say something, to ask for help, to apologize for wandering into the wrong site. Nothing. The fire crackled, the forest breathed, the person remained still. I remember thinking how intentional it felt, how precise, like they knew exactly where the light ended, and they didn't want to cross it. That was when I realized something worse. They hadn't just walked up. They had been there long enough to know where to stop, and I had no idea how long they'd been watching me before I noticed. I stayed still longer than made sense, longer than felt safe. The person didn't move, didn't shift their weight, didn't step into the light. They stood exactly where the firelight ended, like they were testing an invisible boundary. I cleared my throat. The sound felt loud in the quiet. "Hey," I said. My voice sounded wrong out there, too thin. The figure didn't respond. I tried again, louder. "You okay?" Nothing. I leaned forward just enough to feel the heat from the fire on my face. The light flickered, stretching shadows across the ground. For a moment, I thought the person might step back. They didn't. They adjusted, just slightly, not closer, not farther, sideways, staying inside the dark. That's when I realized they were watching the fire, not me, watching how far the light reached. My stomach tightened. I stood up slowly, kept my hands visible, didn't reach for the flashlight by my chair. "Campground's pretty empty tonight," I said. "You looking for someone?" The words felt stupid the second they left my mouth. The person tilted their head, just enough to notice. Still no face. The light never touched them. I waited for a voice, a cough, anything human. Instead, the fire popped again, Sparks lifted. The light jumped. For a brief second, I saw an outline, arms at their sides, head slightly forward. No backpack, no flashlight, no phone glow. They were empty-handed. The fire settled. The darkness reclaimed them. I sat back down, not because I felt safe, because I didn't want to give them any more information. The person remained. Minutes passed. The fire burned lower. The circle of light slowly shrank. They didn't move with it. They stayed exactly where they were, letting the light retreat. That was when I understood what they were doing. They were waiting for the fire to die. I reached for another log, added it to the fire. The flames flared up, bright and sudden. Light rushed outward. For the first time, the person reacted. They stepped back. Just one step, enough to stay in the dark. Enough to keep the distance the same. I didn't add another log. I didn't speak. I just sat there, feeding the fire slowly, watching the edge of the light, watching them watch it. Neither of us moved toward the other, and that felt intentional. I kept the fire alive longer than I needed to, not because I was cold, because I didn't want to see what happened when the light finally gave up. The person never stepped closer, never farther than necessary. Every time the fire dimmed, they adjusted, a half step, a shift, always staying just beyond the glow. I tried to focus on ordinary things, the sound of wood settling, the smell of smoke in my clothes, anything that made this feel normal. It didn't work. My eyes kept drifting back to the edge of the light, to that exact spot where the dark seemed thicker. I wondered if they were smiling, if they were counting how many logs I had left, if they knew I was alone. The thought made my hands shake. I decided to test something. I stood up and took 2 steps away from the fire, toward the tent. The light moved with me. My shadow stretched behind. The person didn't react. They didn't follow. They didn't retreat. They stayed where they were. I took another step back, then another. The distance between us grew. The fire still burned between us, but the circle widened. For the first time, the person was no longer at the edge of the light. They were deeper in the dark. That scared me more than if they had come closer, because it meant they weren't tied to the fire. They were choosing where to stand. I stopped. The person shifted again, not toward me, toward the fire, keeping the same distance. I felt a cold certainty settle in my chest. This wasn't random. This wasn't curiosity. They were controlling the space. I sat back down. The fire popped loudly, sending a rush of sparks upward. For a split second, the light flashed brighter than it had all night. I saw them more clearly. Not their face, not details, just enough to confirm something I had been hoping wasn't true. They weren't standing casually. They weren't relaxed. Their posture was alert, balanced, like they were ready to move if I did. The light fell. The darkness closed in again. They disappeared back into the black. I reached for my flashlight, held it in my hand. I didn't turn it on. I knew if I did, they would step back, or vanish, or worse. I wanted to know what would happen if I didn't, so I waited. And the fire kept burning lower. The fire burned down faster than I expected. Logs collapsed into themselves. Flames lowered. The circle of light tightened around the pit. The person didn't rush, didn't take advantage of it. They waited. I added another log. The fire flared briefly, and then settled. The person stepped back. Just enough. It was like we were negotiating without speaking. Light for distance, dark for proximity. I checked my phone. No signal. The other campsites were too far away to call out to. Even if someone heard me, it would take time. I tried to imagine running, grabbing my keys and driving off. The thought of turning my back on them made my stomach twist. I sat back down. The fire dropped again. Lower this time. I had one log left. I held it in my hands longer than necessary, feeling the rough bark, the weight. If I added it, I'd buy more time. If I didn't, the light would fade. The person shifted their stance. Not closer, just more present. I threw the log into the fire. The flames jumped. Light spilled outward. For the first time, I heard something from them. A sound, low, not a word. It came from the dark just beyond the light. I couldn't tell if it was a breath, or a hum, or something else entirely. My skin prickled. The sound stopped. The fire settled again. The person didn't move. I waited, my muscles tight, my eyes burning from staring too long. Minutes dragged by. Then, without warning, the person stepped sideways, out of the spot they'd been holding all night. They moved deeper into the trees, not away, just out of sight. I stood up. The fire crackled softly. The wood swallowed the dark shape completely. I waited for footsteps, branches snapping, leaves crunching. Nothing. The silence felt heavier than before. I stood there, alone in the light, unsure if I was truly alone at all. And that was when I realized something. They didn't need to stay visible anymore. They already knew where I was. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed by the fire until the sky began to lighten, adding small pieces of wood just to keep the glow alive. Every sound in the trees felt closer once I couldn't see beyond them. Nothing came back into the light. No footsteps, no voice, no shape. When morning finally arrived, it felt wrong, too normal. The campground looked exactly as it had when I arrived. Empty sites, cold fire pits. No sign that anyone had been standing just feet away from me for hours. I packed slowly, carefully. I kept looking toward the trees, half expecting to see movement. There was none. On my way out, I stopped at the campground board. A faded map, a few notices. One flyer caught my eye. Do not approach individuals lingering at night. Report unusual behavior to park staff. It wasn't new. The edges were curled. The ink faded. It had been there for a while. I drove home in silence. For a long time after that, I avoided open spaces at night, backyards, parks, anywhere without a clear edge. Light stopped feeling comforting. It felt temporary. I tried to explain it to friends. They suggested obvious things. A lost camper, someone messing with me, a harmless local. I never argued, because none of those explanations answered the part that stayed with me. They never tried to get closer. They never tried to scare me. They never crossed the line. They just stayed where the light couldn't touch them, watching, waiting. Years later, I still think about that night whenever I see a campfire, about how the light doesn't push the dark away. It just shows you where it stops. And sometimes, that's exactly where someone wants to be. I went camping to clear my head. That was the excuse I gave people. The truth was simpler. I didn't want to be around anyone. Work had been loud. Life had been loud. Even my apartment felt crowded with noise that never stopped. So I packed my car late one evening and drove toward the mountains. No destination I cared about, just a small, remote campground I'd passed a few times before. It wasn't popular, no lake, no trails worth advertising, just a loop road, a few numbered sites, and long stretches of trees that blocked out everything else. I arrived close to midnight. The entrance sign was barely lit. Most of the campground was dark. Only one other car was parked near the far end. No lights on, no movement. I chose a site near the middle, close enough to the road that I could leave quickly if I needed to, far enough that I felt alone. I set up quietly, tent first, then the sleeping bag. I didn't bother with a fire, didn't feel like staying up. The air was cold, still, too still. I lay back inside the tent, listening to the sounds I expected to hear. Wind, insects, something familiar. There was nothing. No crickets, no rustling leaves, no distant cars, just silence. I checked my phone. No signal. I wasn't surprised. That was part of the appeal. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. That was when I heard my name. Soft, almost polite, like someone testing the sound of it. I froze. I hadn't told anyone where I was going. No one knew I'd come here. I listened harder. Nothing. I told myself it was my imagination, a half dream, the kind that happens when you're tired. Then it happened again. My name, this time closer, coming from somewhere beyond the tent, somewhere in the trees. The voice wasn't loud. It didn't sound angry. It sounded careful, like whoever was speaking didn't want to wake anyone else. I sat up slowly. My heart was pounding. "Hello," I said. My voice felt too big in the quiet. There was a pause, then the voice answered, not with words, just my name again. Slightly wrong, the rhythm was off, the emphasis strange, like it had been practiced. I didn't respond. I reached for my flashlight, held it tight. I didn't turn it on. I waited. And whoever was out there waited too. I stayed still, listening for any sound that would explain what I had heard. Wind through branches, footsteps, anything. There was nothing. The silence felt deliberate, like it was being held in place. I tightened my grip on the flashlight. My thumb hovered over the switch. I told myself that if I turned it on, I'd feel better. Light meant control. Light meant certainty. I didn't turn it on. I waited. A minute passed, then another. Just as my breathing began to slow, I heard it again. My name. This time, closer to the tent. Still soft. Still careful. The voice came from a different direction. Not where it had been before. I swallowed. "Who's there?" I asked. No answer. The silence stretched. Then, from somewhere behind the tent, the voice spoke again. My name, but flatter, less sure, like it was adjusting. My chest tightened. I unzipped the tent just enough to see out. A thin black line opened in the fabric. The campground was dark, empty. No flashlight beam, no phone glow, no shape I could focus on. "Hello," I said again, louder this time. Nothing replied. I zipped at the tent shut. The voice didn't stop. It stayed outside, moving slowly, circling. Each time it spoke my name, the rhythm changed slightly, like it was learning, testing which version would make me respond. I pressed my back against the tent wall. Every sound felt closer now. I thought about leaving, grabbing my keys, driving away. The idea of stepping outside the tent stopped me. I didn't know where the voice was anymore. It could have been anywhere. I stayed where I was, listening, waiting. Eventually, the voice stopped. The silence returned, heavier than before. I don't know how long it lasted. Time felt wrong out there. When I finally heard something else, it wasn't my name. It was movement. Slow footsteps. Careful, not running, not approaching, just shifting position. Somewhere close enough that I could hear the ground respond. I didn't turn on the flashlight. I didn't call out. I waited. And the thing outside the tent waited too. The footsteps stayed just out of reach. I could hear them shift in the dirt, pause, move again. They never rushed, never committed to a direction, like whoever was out there didn't want to be seen, just present. I tried to map the sound in my head, left side of the tent, then the back, then somewhere near the road. Each time I thought I understood where they were, the sound came from somewhere else. I whispered to myself, just to hear a human voice. It helped for a moment. Then my name came again, closer than before, so close I could feel it through the thin wall of the tent. Not loud, not threatening, careful. I pressed my palm against the ground. The dirt felt cold. Stop, I said, not yelling, just firm. The word hung there. The footsteps stopped for a brief, terrifying moment. I thought it had worked. That whoever it was had understood. Then the voice answered, my name. But wrong. Too slow. Each syllable stretched, almost curious, like it was tasting the sound. I felt something settle in my chest, a certainty I didn't want. This wasn't someone trying to scare me. This wasn't a prank. They were listening, learning. I reached for my keys, wrapped my fingers around the metal. If I ran, I would have to unzip the tent. I would have to step into the dark. I imagined the moment, the zipper sound, the sudden exposure. The footsteps shifted, closer. I let go of the keys. The voice didn't speak again, but the presence didn't leave. It stayed, patient, unmoving. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds. Time didn't matter. What mattered was that I wasn't alone, and whoever was out there knew exactly how still I was. That was when I realized I wasn't being followed. I was being kept in place. I stopped trying to understand it. Understanding meant thinking. Thinking meant panic. So I focused on staying still, on breathing, on not giving away anything more than I already had. The footsteps didn't circle anymore. They stayed in one place, close, too close to guess without seeing. I listened for the smallest details, the weight of a step, the scrape of a shoe. Nothing. It was as if whoever was out there had decided that moving wasn't necessary anymore. My phone screen lit up when I checked the time, 17 a.m. The glow felt dangerous. I turned it face down immediately. That's when I heard the voice again. Not my name. A sound. Low, almost thoughtful, like someone mimicking the idea of speech. I pressed my lips together, forced myself not to respond. The sound came again, closer, then silence. I waited for the next thing. A hand on the tent, the zipper moving. Neither happened. Instead, I felt a pressure, not physical, not exactly. The sense that something was leaning in, listening. I remembered something I had read once about how predators test boundaries, how they wait to see what gets a reaction. I wondered if that was what this was, if it knew that as long as I stayed inside, it had control. Minutes passed, my legs cramped, my back ached. I didn't move. Eventually, the pressure eased, not gone, just shifted. The footsteps returned, slow, careful. They moved away from the tent, toward the road. I held my breath. The sound faded, then stopped. I didn't relax. I knew better. Because leaving quietly doesn't mean leaving for good. It just means they've decided to wait somewhere else. I didn't wait for morning. The moment the footsteps faded toward the road, I knew it was my only window. Not because I felt safe, because I felt allowed. I moved slowly, carefully. I packed without turning on any lights. Sleeping bag rolled tight, keys in hand. Every sound felt too loud. The zipper, the fabric, my own breathing. I kept expecting the voice to come back. My name. Wrong again. It didn't. That scared me more than if it had. I stepped out of the tent. The night air hit my face, cold and sharp. The campground looked unchanged. Empty sites, dark trees, the road stretching away into black. I didn't look toward the trees. I walked straight to my car. Didn't run, didn't rush. I didn't want to trigger anything. When I started the engine, the headlights cut through the dark. For a brief moment, the trees lit up. Nothing moved. I pulled onto the road and drove. Slowly at first, then faster. I didn't stop until the sky began to lighten. Only then did my hands start to shake. Later that day, I told people I left because I couldn't sleep, because it was colder than I expected, because I'd forgotten something important. All of that was easier than the truth. I left because something knew my name and learned how to say it. I never went back to that campground. But sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I think about that moment, the moment the voice stopped, and I wonder if it was leaving, or if it was just waiting for me to move first. We like to believe the dark hides things from us, but sometimes it's hiding us from them. The next story is worse.